So this morning we're continuing our new sermon series called Gazing on the Starlit Sky. And what we're talking about in this series is the things that keep us from finding and entering into real joy. What are they? If we can see them, if we can understand them, can we overcome them? And what we mean by joy is not just our fleeting notions of what will make us happy, but that deeper thing, that sort of elated contentment that comprises the joy of experiencing who we really are in the grip of a good and a beautiful God, and then how that spills over into how we look out at life, how we do our relationships with people, and what comes out of all that. Another way to put it would be this: happiness, the way we often talk about it, is often selfish and based on some quick fix for our feelings of emptiness. I just want to be happy, right? But joy occurs when our own heart is caught up in the love and the beauty in which and for which all things and all people were made. You might know this story in the 9th chapter of John's Gospel. It's a story about a guy who's born blind. And one day he encounters Jesus, and Jesus heals him. And after Jesus heals him, between this man and his family and the Pharisees, the religious leaders, all hell kind of breaks loose. They come and find this man. They're very upset. Jesus is stealing their thunder, the religious leaders. And so they come and they find this man, and they demand that he basically either recant the story or come up with a different explanation for it. And the guy's like, I don't know. Here's what I know, guys. I know I was blind, and I know I can see. And then they find the man's parents, and they threaten to throw him out of the synagogue. We're going to kick you out of the church. If you don't give us a different explanation for this story, we're going to kick you out of the church. And so all of this is going on, and at the end of this story, Jesus makes this, he uses the man's physical blindness as an analogy for the spiritual blindness he has come to dispel from people's lives. And he makes a sort of summary statement out of, a sort of analogous summary statement out of this story. And he says this in John 9:39. Jesus says, "For judgment I have come into the world, that those," and really the word to use there would be like discernment. "For discernment I have come into the world, so that those who do not see may see, and those who claim they see may be shown to be blind." And then some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words, and they said to him, "Are you saying that we're blind?" You picture Jesus like, maybe. Actually, Jesus' response is this: well, if you were blind, you wouldn't have any sin. And in other words, if you guys really couldn't see any of these things, if you were incapable of seeing any of these things, then it wouldn't be sinful. But he says the problem is you claim to see. And so, in fact, your sin remains. You're saying you get God, you get everything, you don't need to learn anything. So Jesus is essentially saying you're willfully blind. You're willfully blind. And then, at the beginning of chapter 10 there in John's Gospel, Jesus gives a parable, so to speak. He's in this situation, the Pharisees say, "Are we blind?" And Jesus basically, "Yes, you are blind, and you're willfully, sinfully blind." And so this is kind of an argument phase of the conversation. And Jesus says this: "Let me tell you something. He who does not enter the sheepfold, the pasture, by the door, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. And the doorkeeper opens the door for him, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. And when he brings out his own sheep, he walks before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. Yet they will by no means follow a stranger, but will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers." Jesus is basically saying, listen, the sheep know the voice of the good shepherd. He's basically telling the Pharisees, these people can discern the difference between me and you. You're stealing things from them. I'm leading them into good pasture. And they're able to discern that. And so the Pharisees are the thieves in Jesus' parable. And it's really an insightful analogy on Jesus' part, which I guess is not surprising to say that something's an insightful analogy on Jesus' part. But it's an insightful analogy because whenever someone coerces you or manipulates you, they are in fact stealing something from you. They are telling you who you should be in relation to something, rather than letting you be who you are. In the case of the man born blind that Jesus healed, the Pharisees had this agenda. They saw themselves as the protectors of Jewish faith, and they saw Jesus as a threat to their ideas about God and a threat to their control over people, which, by the way, they told themselves was noble and godly. We're only controlling these people with an iron fist and judging them so harshly because we're trying to help them be godly. So they could not just let this man be a man who had suffered blindness all his life and who now had the gift of sight and rejoice with him. Pharisees just couldn't say, wow. The guy's like, hey, I got healed. And the Pharisees couldn't just be like, man, that's awesome, you know? And they couldn't just let his parents be happy for their son. So they stole those things from them because they had their own agenda. Their first concern was not for the sheep. And Jesus is illustrating that with this illustration about the sheep. And then verse 6 says this, Jesus used this illustration, but they did not understand the things which he spoke to them. Shocker. My sermon this morning is called, When We Give Everyone Else Power Over Our Joy. And I want to talk about this because when we talk about obstacles to our joy, we oftentimes think in terms of external forces. Like, I don't have joy because my circumstances are this way. I don't have joy because of the way this person I have this relationship with is being. And so our joy is kind of parceled out to all the external things. So if the external things are not good, well then there's no possibility of joy. But we often seem to forget that our joy is often stolen by others, and that at least as adults, maybe this is not so much true for kids, we have some control. We have some agency in these things. To be blunt, we let people steal our joy. Now, sometimes what we need is better boundaries. You know what boundaries are? That's been a big relational, psychological, emotional concept for us in probably for the last, 30 years in America. The idea of boundaries is that, people keep coming into your life and pushing past the places they should push past in order to control you or demean you or define you. And so you need some boundaries so that you can say to people, no, you don't get to do that. You don't get to keep tearing holes out of my personhood in our relationship. So you create some appropriate boundaries. And we all need some boundaries. It's a good concept. Because some people get walked all over or taken advantage of over and over because they can't seem to get any boundaries in place. And we've all either been that person or we've known folks like that. But there's also a place where this idea of boundaries kind of falls short, or maybe a better way to put it is it can only take us so far. Because if you embrace the idea of boundaries without setting that concept of boundaries in the larger picture of love and restoration, then boundaries can become just a mechanism of self-protection that's mostly rooted in fear. Right? I have these boundaries because, people are dangerous and it's primarily fear that's driving our approach to our relationship with others. I've seen people who, like all of us, have been hurt by others, and then when they get a hold of the concept of setting up boundaries between themselves and others, they're kind of like this. That's what I need is boundaries. Don't come near me. I got boundaries. Don't mess with me. I'll hurt you back, And I know people like that. And I have known many people like that. When they got a hold of that concept, they said, oh yeah, this is what I need, man. Nobody's hurting me again. I'm not getting hurt. I'm not getting hurt. I'm not getting hurt. I wonder if Jesus would have changed anything going to the cross if he'd read the book on boundaries first. Raises an interesting question. He would have said, wait a minute, you people can't do this to me. But there was something also bigger at play. Jesus probably had appropriate boundaries, and he certainly exercised appropriate boundaries with the Pharisees all the time. But there was something bigger at play there. So boundaries can be good. Some people have lacked the ability to say no to other people. They're always getting steamrolled, taken advantage of, hurt, and they need boundaries. Absolutely. We all need some. But I want to share an observation out of my years of life wisdom, that's a joke, come on. Maybe you think I have that much life wisdom, I don't know. Out of my years of life wisdom and my years of ministry with people, and that observation is this: learning how to implement boundaries in your life does not automatically lead to joy. And the reason is because even with lots of good boundaries in place, you can live from a lot of fear and in a primarily defensive disposition with other people. And joy and fear are antithetical. In other words, they don't really hang out together a lot, joy and fear. And if you are living life toward other people in a primarily defensive disposition, how will you possibly fulfill the command to love? So if boundaries, as helpful as they can be, and I am recommending you have appropriate boundaries in your life, as helpful as they can be in preventing some of the ways that people steal things from us, if by themselves they can't bring us to joy, what is the missing piece as it relates to the relationship between our joy and our relationships with other people? What's interesting in this passage in John 10 is that whereas the blind man and his parents are very fearful of the Pharisees, Jesus is not. It's not just that Jesus is willing to argue with them, it's that there's no feeling as you read the story of Jesus cowering before these people. And I think it becomes clear as you read on in their interactions why that's the case. Listen to just a couple of the statements that come from Jesus' lips in the paragraphs after that whole business about the sheep and the good shepherd and the thieves. Jesus says things like this: "Most assuredly I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. But a hireling, he who is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, he sees the wolf coming, and he leaves the sheep and he flees. And the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them. The hireling flees because he is a hireling and does not care about the sheep." And then Jesus says this: "As the Father knows me, even so I know the Father." And then I love what comes after these. The Pharisees are divided after this, because Jesus is talking about this difference between someone who really loves the sheep, who knows the Father who made these sheep, and he loves the sheep, and he's for the sheep, and he watches out for the sheep, and the person who's a hireling, or even worse, a thief. And it says, "Therefore there was a division again among the Pharisees because of these sayings. Many of them said, 'He has a demon and is mad. Why are you listening to him?' But others of them said, 'These are not the words of a man who has a demon. Besides, can a demon open the eyes of the blind?'" So it's funny, Jesus is trying to explain to them, he's really explaining love to them, like care for people and what really matters. And some of them are like, "This guy's got a demon, don't listen." And the other group is like, "He doesn't really seem like a demon guy." The things that he's saying. What is apparent as we listen to Jesus, at the risk of stating the unbelievably obvious, is this: Jesus knows who he is. And the reason that's striking is because so many of us, as we soldier along through this human life, do not really know who we are. Oscar Wilde wrote, "Most people are other people. Their thoughts are someone else's opinions, their lives a mimicry, their passions a quotation." This is a whole actual study in social science. It's called mimesis. And it's the idea that primarily we learn how to think about life and ourselves and other people and relationships by copying the people around us, by learning from the people around us. That's what Oscar Wilde is saying. It's someone else's opinions. It's a mimicry of their stuff. Our passions are, somebody else had a passion about this, and then we thought, oh, we should be passionate about that too. That seems like the thing you're supposed to be passionate about. Jesus knows who he is. It's the reason he's not only able to withstand the onslaught of the Pharisees over and over and over across the years of his ministry, but why he's able to also simultaneously love people and offer people this positive vision of human existence and what is available to them. That love Jesus has for people that we observe in the Gospels, and that vision for human life that he offers to us, that human life marked by love and joy, that comes from a well inside Jesus that's deeper than defending yourself. That's why what I've been trying to say to you this morning is it's not enough to defend yourself. There has to be something else you're caught up in. There has to be some deeper well that you're tapped into. When Jesus describes the kingdom of God to us in the Beatitudes, it's a kingdom comprised of humility and mercy and good motives, i.e. love, like good desires, right, toward other people, and peacemaking, and desiring justice, or what I like to call everything rightness for everybody, right, which again is love. It's not a life lived from fear that Jesus is describing, but from someplace deeper, from something bigger. In Luke 12:32, Jesus says, "Fear not, little flock. It is the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." Somebody say, wow. Like Jesus is like this kingdom comprised of all these good things. It is the Father's pleasure to give you this and bring you into this. And it's not just a matter of surviving, and it's not just a matter of defending your territory. It's something bigger. So I'll say it again. Jesus knows who he is. In modern terms, we use the word identity for this. Jesus is not someone else, as Oscar Wilde said. He is himself. And he isn't getting pushed around by other people or letting other people define him or wondering if he should be trying to be like other people, because from some deeper place inside himself, he has found a profound sense of who he is and who he was made to be. And my reading of the New Testament, combined with the experience of my own life and observing other people, has taught me and convinced me that in Jesus' life, this comes from one focal thing. Would you like to know what it is? You don't sound very eager. Would you like to know what it is? Yes. It's his communion with the Father. It's his communion with the Father. A few chapters later, in John 15, we hear Jesus say these words, "Abide in me, and I will abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself, but only if it abides in the vine, neither can you bear fruit by yourself unless you abide in me. I am the vine." Don't you love this? I am the vine, and you are the branches. The whole world's telling us who we are or who we should be. We're often worried that we're not good enough. I just read this crazy thing, like, with some seminar of young people in their 20s who were talking about, but it was like an audience full of people, like a theater full of people. They were talking about, like, what they think about God. And some of them were Christians, non-Christians, whatever. You know the number one question these 20-somethings had about God was? Is God mad at me? That's their number one question. Is God, what they're really saying is this God's primary disposition toward me? And a lot of us go through that in our lives. But listen to this. You know how God looks at you? This way. I'm the vine and you're my branches. You're already connected into me. And without me, you're probably not going to bear a lot of fruit. And then he says, as the Father loved me, I have also loved you. So abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. In other words, if you do live this thing the way I've been teaching you, just as I've done what my Father asked and I've abided in his love. These things I have spoken to you. Listen to this. We're talking, what's this series about? Anybody remember? Oh, joy. These things I have spoken to you that my joy may remain in you. Which things that I've spoken to you? Abide in me, and I'll abide in you. Walk in my love, let my love live in you. Just as the Father's loved me, I've loved you. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may remain in you, and that your joy may be full. I don't know if you've ever heard of Henri Nouwen. Wonderful. He's gone home to be with the Lord a long time ago now. Wonderful spiritual writer, Catholic priest. I think I own every one of his books. Small books that Linda and I always say, how does he write so much in like 60 pages that like changes your life? Henri Nouwen wrote this: over the years I have come to realize that the greatest trap in our life is not success, popularity, or power, but self-rejection. Success, popularity, and power can indeed present a great temptation, but their seductive quality often comes from the way they are part of the much larger temptation to self-rejection. When we have come to believe in the voices that call us worthless and unlovable, then success, popularity, and power are easily perceived as attractive solutions. Do you hear that? I can't find it in here. I'll find it out there. The real trap, however, is self-rejection. And as soon as someone accuses me or criticizes me, as soon as I am rejected, left alone, or abandoned, I find myself thinking, well, that proves once again that I am a nobody. My dark side says, I am no good, I deserve to be pushed aside, forgotten, rejected, and abandoned. Self-rejection is the greatest, listen to this, self-rejection is the greatest enemy of the spiritual life because it contradicts the sacred voice that calls us the beloved. Being the beloved constitutes the core truth of our existence. When we feel poorly about ourselves, guys, compared to other people, we look to them for our identity, or we default to believing that our value is reflected in how others treat us. That's why success and popularity, that's why that stuff is tempting, because it offers to make us feel better about ourselves. But when we begin to understand, as Nouwen puts it, that being the beloved constitutes the core truth of your existence, now we know who to ask. Lord, who do you say that I am? I know what everybody else says I am, but who do you say that I am? Who have you made me to be? What do you think of me? This is what Jesus knew, that being loved by the Father was the core of his existence. 40 years ago, I heard an old Pentecostal preacher named T.L. Osborne put it this way, and I never, ever forgot it for a second. Very simple phrase. Other people's heads are a bad place to keep your happiness. You know whose head is the place to keep your happiness? God's head. That's the place to keep your happiness. Just as the Father loved me, I love you. I'm the vine, you're the branches. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. That's a place to keep your happiness. Do we need the wise counsel of others? Yes. Can others reveal to us the depth of who we are and become a place to anchor the core of our existence? They can't. Any more than I can go home with you today and be the sunshine over your backyard. I'm not enough. But there's somebody who is. By the way, do not mix up people appearing to know who they are with really knowing who they are. People knowing who they are is often faked by a learned, feigned, put-on assertiveness. They're the ones who are always telling everybody the way it is and putting other people in their place. They're the ones who say, well, this is just the way I am. Well, I just say what I think. And everybody else kind of does this around them. You'll know them because they're very good talkers and terrible listeners. And it's actually not self-confidence that you're seeing in them, it's fear. So don't be fooled, because if you're fooled, you'll look at people like that and say, how can I be like them? You don't want to be like them. Now, one thing I think we all know about our sense of identity, about figuring out who we are and who we want to be and who we're uniquely made to be, is I think we know, maybe we don't know it at 10, but we know it by 30. And we certainly know it at my age. 45. Is that, bless you. When I go to Haiti, I always ask the kids how old they think I am. And they always say things like, 120? Like, thank you. And then there was one girl who was like, 18? I'm like, yes. But the one thing we know is that this process of identity and finding it's a journey. And the only way I know to illustrate that for you, for anyone from my own life, is from my own life, to tell you something about my own journey with these things. I think along the way, when you go through life's twists and turns, it's sometimes painful ups and downs, I think you often can't see the growth happening in yourself. Have you had that experience? Like you think, I don't know if I'm really growing. I don't know if I'm really making progress, if I'm really doing better on this journey of being a Christ follower, being a human being than I was before. But I can tell you from where I sit at this stage in my life that when I look back a number of years, the change in my own sense of identity, the change in my own sense of rootedness is remarkable. In my mind, for some reason, the age I tend to compare myself to when I think about these things is the age I was when we started LifeSpring Church. I was 32, and I don't know, any God who would let a 32-year-old start a church is nuts, but, you know, that's up to the Lord, I guess. And I don't know why that's a marker for me, but it is. And so I will often think about my life in terms of who I was then versus who I am now. And I was a pretty good guy. I was a better guy at 32 than I was at 22. But I was really insecure. The judgments of others, if someone didn't like what I did, they cut really, really deeply inside me. I didn't let other people see that most of the time, but I'm sure my insecurities were visible. One of the ways I experienced that was that strong personalities in the church in our early years, people who came in and had a lot of ideas about the church, maybe they'd been a leader in some other church, those people were able to like push me this way and pull me this way, and I often felt like I was being jerked around by people like, Pastor, we need to do this. Pastor, we need to do that. Pastor, the church should be like this. Pastor, our theology should be like this. All these different kind of things. And my beat on the Christian faith at 32 was pretty good. I mean, Linda and I had escaped the legalistic sort of Christianity that we had been a part of in the journey we'd had before and in the church that we'd been a part of before. But even with that, I was very aware of whether others found my understanding of the Christian faith pleasing. I didn't want to upset. That's a good way to put it. Didn't want to upset anybody with any of my ideas about Christianity. Today, by contrast, even though I accept a lot more mystery in my faith, which is now a beautiful thing for me, and even though I know I still have a lot to learn, I have a very strong conception of the Christian faith today, of what the way of Jesus looks like, and it's okay with me that a lot of other Christians are going to disagree with it. That's okay with me if they don't see it the way that I see it. Because my conception of these things, of what life is about, because when I say what the Christian journey is, for me, that's what life is about. That conception for me, it's rooted in years of sitting with Scripture and sitting with Jesus and listening to the Holy Spirit and knowing my own heart and experience and knowing as well as I can the heart and experience of other people. And today, another difference is I can handle constructive criticism, but I also understand that a lot of criticism and angst is the mess inside other people and has nothing to do with me. See, in my earlier years, because of my insecurity, whenever someone would disagree with me or I'd have an argument with somebody or some kind of, we didn't see things the same way, or they were upset with me for some reason, my first thought was always, oh, what did I do? It's me. I blew it again. I screwed this up again. I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have said that. Now, I'll own my stuff. I own my stuff all the time. I own it in my marriage. I own it with my friends. I own it in this church. But there are also lots of times when, somebody comes at me about something and I think, brother, this mess and angst is inside you. This has nothing to do with me. This is your mess, not my mess, Which reminds me of my favorite Christian cartoon. There's not even a close second. You probably heard me say this before, but some of you I'm sure have never heard it. It's one of those one-frame cartoons. I don't know where I saw this. And it's Jesus and this guy walking through the airport. And Jesus is pulling all these bags. You know how you got the suitcases that hook onto the suitcases that hook onto the suitcases? Jesus is pulling all these bags. And there's just a line and a response. So the guy that's walking with Jesus says to Jesus, "Hey, God, how come you come with so much baggage?" And Jesus' response is, "What are you talking about? This is all your..." Right? Right? So now because I have this different sense of who I am, I can say like, hey, I can navigate what's going on in a situation so much better because I'm not owning all the world's everything, and I'm not owning all your angst, man. You got to own your own stuff. I'll own mine. You got to own yours. And it's just a different sense of who I am. A good example of this is the political stuff the last couple of years. And I got criticized a lot. Some of it by people who were willing to have conversation with me in our church. Some of it hearsay that came back to me. So people are upset, Pastor Fran, because you said we should really think about blah, blah, blah. And then there were, people who just criticized me behind my back because people said, "Oh, Pastor Fran is too much this over here. Pastor Fran is too much this over here." Here's my response. Whatever. I know who I am. And I know how I'm navigating these things, and I'm navigating these things trying to put my eyes on Him. Certainly not perfectly, but trying to put my eyes on Him and trying to have a right heart here. And you know what? That's all you get to ask of me. So whatever. And success, right? When I was younger, even a lot of my ministry work was because I thought if I could successfully plant this church, this is like the worst confession of my life. I made it another time recently, either in a sermon or to somebody. A lot of my ministry work was because I thought if I could successfully plant this church, I'd be somebody. It was probably subconscious, but man, I'm telling you, it was there. So today, if you say, "Well, how do you think about success now, Pastor Fran?" I already have success. I've loved one woman for 40 years. 42 if we count dating and engagement. I've loved one woman for 40 years. I have 2 amazing, wonderful children. My son, Luke, and his wife, Joya, are here from Wisconsin this morning. You can clap. When they lived here, they were always up here making music with us, but they're visiting today. I have 2 great kids, and I love people. And see, I know that about myself. Like sometimes if someone gives me some grief about, it's something they think I navigated wrong or I shouldn't have looked at something a certain way or whatever, here's what I know about my motives. I know my own motives. I love people. I love all kinds of people. And I have a bunch of people, including lots of you, maybe most of you, who love me back. So the rest beyond that, now I'm hoping we're going to still do some great things, right? I want to accomplish some great things in my life. I'm hoping we as a church are going to do some great things. But here are the things. The rest is gravy or icing on the cake or whatever you want to call it. Because I already have all these good gifts that have come from the Father of the heavenly lights, And so, back then, 32 years ago, I didn't know who I was. Today, I like who I am. And I want to tell you where this more rooted sense of identity it has come from in my life. It has come from rooting my heart again and again and again in the love of the beautiful God revealed in Jesus Christ. And God's Holy Spirit over the years has taught me who I am. And no, I haven't arrived, but my identity is not adrift in the sea of the world like it was all those years ago. Man, that's a big deal to me. And really, all I want to encourage you guys to do today is to think deeper than your culture, deeper than your friends, deeper than your enemies, deeper than those who are the big and powerful voices in your life telling you who you are. Think deeper and know this. You are the beloved of God. You are the beloved of God. Uniquely made and uniquely called. And Jesus says if you abide in Him, He'll abide in you, and you will know who you are and what life is so that your joy may be full. This is the source of identity that the world doesn't really know. How can they? It reminds me of that place in one of Paul's Corinthians letters. I can't remember exactly where it is, but where Paul says, the natural man, some of you know this verse, the natural man cannot understand the things of the Spirit. He can't know them. It's impossible. But when you open your soul to Christ, when you begin to discover this, then the love of God as the rooted places now instead of the core of your existence, it becomes food for your soul, and it becomes the source for the deep sense of who you are. And the whole point of this sermon, maybe I should have just given you this line and not preach the whole thing, but the whole point is this: when you know who you are, particularly if you are rooted in being the beloved of God, then it gets a lot harder for people to steal your joy. It gets a lot harder for people to steal your joy. Here's how Revelation 2:17 puts it. This is Jesus speaking, and he's talking about giving you this hidden food, this secret kingdom, this thing that the world can't see. He's talking about giving you that, and he's talking about your identity, who you really are. Listen to it, it's beautiful. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, I will give some of the hidden manna to eat. This verse blows my mind. And I will give him a white stone, and on that stone is a new name written, which no one knows except him who receives it. That's God saying, I will tell you who you are. Father, we have wandered and wandered and wandered through the world. There's no way for us to have escaped from childhood the fact, Lord, that 1,000 voices have tried to tell us who we are, what we can and can't be, what we should be like, what we should value, what we should be afraid of. And then you come to us, not telling us to shut out other people, but telling us to stop listening to everyone else about who we were made to be, and to envision ourselves as these beautiful branches connected into the beautiful vine, so that when we wonder, who am I? Why am I here? What am I made to be and do? We know who to ask. We'll abide in you, and you'll abide in us, and you'll lead us to the fountains of joy.